All right, guys. Here we go. Thanks again, DFW Blueprint. Thanks for the likes, shares, and comments. Today, as always, trying to do something casual, have good conversation. We're gonna do something different today. I want to bring on a current client of mine, and today we're going to talk particularly about the inspection process. We might go off on tangents, might have questions, but I think you want to know about the inspection process. This gentleman right here, his name is James, and super, super great, um, and very, very detailed. And between him and I, we learned a lot about the inspection process. And I really hope this is a beneficial conversation for both you and I. So, James, can you hear me? Hello. Did you pick up?
Hello, James.
Hey, James. How's it going?
Yes. Oh, it's going.
Good, good. Sorry about the delay there. I wanted to bring you on, and I was talking so good about you. I don't know if I can repeat it again.
We both know that's a lie.
Yeah, maybe. But I did say that, when you and I connected, you're a very, very detailed and detailed oriented individual. And so when we went through, give a brief little history about our experience in the beginning, saw some houses. But when we really got into it, and we can get into a little bit more of the details, but when we got into the details of a house, particularly the inspection, that's really when things started exposing themselves to the home buying process. So before we kind of get into that, talk to me about your experience as a first time home buyer.
Well, it got easier as time went on, but having never really gone through the process myself firsthand and mainly just living through other people's experiences, it is vastly different than what is shown on TV and on paper. That being said, I'm not uneducated in the process, but you don't really get a firm grasp of what to look for until you talk to people and just, you start getting information. I'd say the biggest thing I found with a lot of the homes, particularly in Texas, and some of this varies between the location and price range and everything, is there's a lot of sellers out there that believe that their home is of a certain stature and quality, but they don't have the information or the quality to back that up once you start digging behind the curtain of paint and upgrades that they put out there first and foremost. So that was the first reality hit that I think we came up against on our first couple of viewings.
Definitely. I mean, I remember one of our first showings, we thought it was great. And then when we started peeling back, looking at sellers' disclosures, looking at this, and you're not wrong. And sellers have this emotional tie to their house where I lived there for X amount of years and it's great quality. Everything's great. The HVAC works. It's amazing. The windows are great, except they're not. They're foggy. They need to be replaced and things like that. And so, um, believe it or not, James and I went through a couple of inspections and we're finalizing one right now in a couple of weeks. But that first one, moving from Washington to Texas, it's a completely different um, type of experience, type of house, type of lands, particularly like the foundation. And I think most people think that inspections are about like the house, but it's really about how you react to the inspection report. I don't know if you remember, the inspector's job is to point these things out. And even though with that conversation, there was still kind of a sticker shock. Wouldn't you say so?
I would say so, and I understand now, the language and how they have to describe and why, because they're putting not their seal of approval per se, but they have to sign off on certain explicities, like for example, electrical panels or HVAC and installation conditions, right? Even drainage. And if you have circumstances where, you have the knowledge to back it up, where you could say, I see where they're coming from, but there's a middle ground I'm not too concerned about, that's one thing. But, for someone like myself, for example, who'd never actually seen a real inspection report to that thoroughness that our inspector Chris had gone through, right?
Right.
It is a shock.
Oh, inspectors go through everything. I tell people, and told you this as well, that top to bottom, they go through roof, HVAC, foundation, everything, big picture, little picture, to the point that they're pointing the heater gun at the oven. And
Yep.
sometimes buyers, when I say it, it's like glossed over a bit, and you kind of had a little bit of shock at how detailed. Chris, one, he's a great inspector, but two, the detail that goes into this stuff, and then on top of that, the detail that you and Emily have was really, really nice. And it really was, because it was a learning process. But going through the inspection, what was like nervous? Were there any nerves, or what were you confident about that first one? Because when we had that first house, we thought it was money. I mean, we were ready to move forward, and then the inspection came back. And I'm not talking about the upside down horseshoe house.
Yeah. So I know which one you're talking about, and it's down just south of here, Farmers Branch area. And that I had a slight hesitation on, because the area is known to have a lot of rip and flip. And if you do just a cursory search down there, right, you don't really have a way to say yes or no, but you can just tell by looking at the template of the homes and the value and what's sold and what's still sitting there after months, right? And generally, one thing I've learned firsthand, having gone through this house selling process, is you have about a 2 to 3 week sweet spot for something to go on market and catch someone's attention before it disappears, right? And the longer it sits, the more of a detriment. So when I get an inspection report back, like we did for that one, for example, we found that there were things that on first paper glance, we thought, well, these were the homeowners for 3 years. And in reality, they were just visitors, right? They weren't really doing anything to upkeep the home. There was missing insulation. There was opportunities with gutters not being cleaned. The minimum spec for things on the inspection were coming back with minimal changes, right, despite being upgraded. So those things add up. And when you see it in person, you look at the house, you don't really have an opportunity to dig deeper than that, right? So I can appreciate having an expert come in to pick that apart. But, like we talked about, you have to be temperamental, you should have some temperaments, I should say, not temperamental, temperance,
right,
when it comes to what's on the paper. And just have a fine balance. But some of those things on there were just non-negotiable. Like, they should never have been lapsed when they were upgraded, right? They just took the minimum there.
Right. I picked up on 2 points there, is experts in the field and what they do. And I think, in fact, if we're talking about the same house, we had an HVAC team come through and give us, like, here's the good, the bad, and here's what you're going to need to do to prevent this stuff. And essentially, it was almost like replacing the entire bones. You can keep the shell.
Oh, yeah.
And I think sometimes buyers, to side note, don't know. You can bring in experts. You get that inspection report. Inspectors are a jack of all trades and a master of all, as Chris would say. But I've had inspectors come out and say the roof needs to be replaced, but the roofer came out and said, I just replaced the roof a month ago, right? So sometimes there's some knuckle banging there, where there's some tension or some things that's miscommunicated. But in this particular case, it was the due diligence that basically we found out why it was on the market for so long. And because of that, like you said, non-negotiables. And just to add clarity on it too, I think it could have been something that may have worked out, but there were other factors involved that caused us to step away from that too, that were not to the benefit of the seller either, right? For sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And then two, temperament. It can be an emotional roller coaster. And that's why I like using Chris. There have been other inspectors that will just send the report directly to the client, not explain anything, not have communication, not schedule it or communicate with you that, hey, I'll be here Thursday at 4. So it gives you an opportunity to learn and ask questions and see it for yourself. And it becomes this coldness, so to speak, where inspectors are sending some reports directly to clients, and they're reading. I think you actually told me this. It's like reading, actually, with your, if you were to send me some of your work, I could read the data, but I don't understand it. And that's where a good inspector and a good real estate agent can explain these things. but I think no matter what, you're gonna see some emotion behind it, and it's okay. I think one of the questions that was asked was, "Man, this is the foundation in Texas," and the
Yep.
joke always goes, "You either have foundation issues, you're gonna have foundation issues, or you have repaired foundation issues. We just have a different piece of land." But with that understanding, now it's the emotions can kind of get level set a little bit. So you know, you use the right word there, having good temperament. Um, was there ever a moment where you thought or Emily thought maybe we shouldn't move forward?
Yeah. I mean, it,
That's
because
news to
there,
me.
it,
No, I'm just kidding.
well, no, it was,
Just kidding.
it is something that crossed the mind. And I say that because, one of the things I had to sit down and really talk about with her and just some people I know in the area is
Yeah.
what are the expectations of these sellers and realtors, right? Because you have markets on paper that look good, you have houses on paper that look good, but is the seller being honest about how they really want to sell the house, right? And if you think about the house that we're under contract to go and close here shortly,
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference in expectation and reality with that compared to all the ones we looked at before, right? You had a realtor that came to the table to work with us that and work with you, no less, to explain and disclose everything up front, right? That to me is a good indicator that the sellers are serious about wanting to sell the home. They're not afraid to present the house in the condition that it is and be honest about what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, for the time that they live there, right? To me, this was the big thing I noticed across all the houses is, yes, you are in a good neighborhood, like say Flower Mound, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, your house may be valuated at a certain price point, but you as the owner never took the time to really appreciate while you were living there and let things go for 5, 10, 20 years, right? And now you want to get out because the albatross is around your neck. And so you do the minimal to get out the door. But reality is when somebody comes in like Chris or myself or both and everybody looks at it, the rubber meets the road. It's not worth that amount, right? And so for me, the big flag was coming in to having someone like yourself as an advocate, but also having a realtor on the other side of it that was willing to have sellers that were also, upfront about what their intentions were.
I know I talk to other selling agents, and I represent both buyers and sellers. But in particular, it's not me versus the seller's agent. It's us working together to get to the finish
Right.
line. And I think not just sellers, but sellers agents as well on how much information they're willing to provide. And you touched on something as far as through your lens. Buyers are very particular now, and that's okay
Yes.
because they can be but there's so much inventory out there. Sellers need to understand that if you want to sell your house, you need to be very, very upfront and honest, but also kind of put in some due diligence on some of the things that you said, like you touched on. They let 15 years of, maybe minimal maintenance, and then, oh crap, now I want to sell and cash in on some equity or whatever life changes they're going through, but they don't do the quality of work that can sometimes get caught by a diligent inspector.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece of it too. And I'll use foundation and electrical as two of the pivot points, right? Because you and I talked very much in depth about this. And in some cases we agree to disagree, but we still come out as a winner.
Yeah.
Foundation being what it is, there's never a situation, especially in Texas, I've learned where you're going to have a perfect foundation. But I think the temperament part we talked about, it coming into it with an expectation of if the owners are doing their due diligence for the property, you're going to have a house like maybe the one we have that has no foundation issues, right? But you go into it knowing that could be a thing. That's a different experience than coming in and they're saying it's move-in ready, but you can roll a bag of marbles on the floor and it comes back to you. So that is a vastly different. Yeah, we did that, right? So that's
a chapstick. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that with a chapstick, and it came back to me, and then ran away.
Yep.
So
exactly.
You have to have an understanding of what you're getting into. But then, while you're there, if you own a home, and you say it's move-in ready, like you pointed out too, it better be move-in ready. And I know that can be very subjective, but the term turnkey is used quite a bit, and I don't like that because it's not fair to the buyer when you say that. Because if I come in and I care about safety, right, and I see an electrical panel that was updated 4 years ago or 10 years ago, and Texas code says, well, this is the minimum, 9 times out of 10, if it's working for them, I can't fault them, and I know it's going to be replaced. But if there's other things that are missing, that would be more modernized, and you put a modern system in there, that also is a red flag as a buyer, because now I wonder what else you're taking shortcuts on.
It does. It creates more questions than answers, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. If all the questions that are anticipated are answered, and that's where, being a seller's agent and a buyer's agent, I can look at both sides of the coin and say, look, if I was a seller's agent, this is what I would do to prepare your house to make sure that you're completely open and honest on that seller's disclosure. How old is your roof? It's 25 years old. Hey, you know what? Maybe we should not, if you want to list it at this price, maybe we should replace the roof, or
Right.
adjust the price, because really, there's a couple of
Right.
things. I mean, what you felt is exactly what most buyers feel. The difference is really having someone guide you through it, and touched on it, with Chris and myself, and even the other agent, the seller's agent. That's where you've got yourself a good agent on both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah.
When you saw the report, um, and did it make you think like, I want to ask for X? And I already know the answer to this question, but as people are listening and watching, it's like, am I allowed to ask for X, Y, and Z, repairs, money, concessions? And then if they say no, because we've come across this, did it change your mindset, you know, about the house and the strategy of approaching the next house?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that, right? The first piece is, I think it's fair to wonder if you can ask for something, because, you're buying into someone's environment, right? But you have to understand too that, it's not guilt. You shouldn't feel ashamed to ask or question something, because you're asking about the future of where you would like to plant and have your family.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're not willing to come to the table as honest stakeholders and have that conversation, well, that's fine. Not everybody has to be personable, but you should have an advocate on your side that knows everything about that house top to bottom, like the one we dealt with the most recent transaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being said, coming into it, I think, again, expectations. If I'm going into a house that I know is in an aging area and it's been heavily renovated and told me to turnkey, but I start digging in and I see that the water tank and everything is rusted, separating, like that one house we looked at up north north of Flower Mountain, just the road. It's one of those things where it's like, well, what else are you hiding? And it turns out they were hiding quite a bit, right? They put a great coat of paint on it and they renovated the house, but you see things on there where the owners didn't even know what they were doing because they weren't even living there. But that wasn't disclosed until it was too late,
Right.
So we had to step away from those transactions, not because we didn't like the home necessarily, but there's a lot of what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the one situation we had, the gentleman, we were willing to negotiate, but before we went through the process of a contract and put money down for a lot of stuff to go through the process to even get an inspection, the trust me bro attitude can't do. If you have maintenance as a seller done on your home, especially after a critical inspection like that one you showed me, right?
Right.
And you have multiple things going on, you should have the documentation to back it up and be able to say with confidence, here's what it is. And they did not have that.
Right.
And so that immediately outdoors.
Yep, that was a case where we saw a house and there was a previous inspection done. The agent was nice enough to give us the inspection, and that's great. But there wasn't enough proof to show it was. I think it was like handwritten. It was a handwritten note on what was done or something like that, right? And
With dates.
And what we asked for was, hey, can I get the transferable warranty? Can I get this? Can I get that? And the seller actually told us no. They said, no, we've given you enough information. And that's where I think you just kind of answered my next question that I had for you as a consumer. But like, doing something different from the beginning is kind of standing on good judgment and trusting your gut, right? If something doesn't smell right or feel right, like in this case, if I've already provided you enough information. Well, not really, not for my feel good sake. And that was one of the ones that that James and I had walked away from, which is, I think we talked about the stars aligned and everything happens for a reason. That's why when we speak to the seller's agent, she was very open, very honest about, oh yeah, this and that, and this is that, here's this information, here's that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference, if you're thinking about selling your home, make sure that you're talking to a seller's agent, because it can affect, people like yourself, James, where, having to have a conversation with her, and what if she didn't know anything? That could have been a huge problem. And I think, we touched on different segments of the inspection process, but real quickly, I mean, the process itself, a lot of people think, oh, it can't happen that fast. Well, it happens as fast as we want it to happen. And what I mean
Right.
by that is most inspectors are good about getting us a report pretty quickly. But I think the biggest thing too is having a conversation with Chris. And as a consumer, you're allowed to be there for the inspection. Number one, go meet your inspector, go have a conversation with him. And at times, the agent should be there to look at the inspection. If they've never done an inspection, they should learn what they do. Um, James, you're smart enough to understand language, and I knew that I had the confidence in you that you were going to question Chris, which is totally awesome. But some consumers, when they hear HVAC, sometimes they don't even know what that means. They don't know the language of the HVAC, and it could trigger an ear where it causes the deal to go through, when really it could be something small or something big. You might think, oh, that's not that big of a deal, when in reality, it is a big deal. So it could go both ways. Um, and I will say that, yes, you and I have had great back and forth conversation about the process, and it's been awesome. It really has. And so, again, the inspector's job and my job as a real estate agent, it's not to eliminate the problems. And as a consumer, I hope I didn't try to push away any or dismiss any problems. It's really just to make sure that you understand them well enough to really make the right decision. And I think that's was the ultimate goal.
I would agree with that, and I think it comes in. There's a bond you have to have with your inspector too that I've learned just as much as you would with your realtor to a certain degree, because they have to be looking for your best interests. At the same time, like for example with Chris, I'd never met Chris, but when he was giving me the rundown, I knew that this guy took his job very seriously. And he was very friendly and very candid, and he was very open about what it was. And he also said, like, hey, I'm going to use some language, but in reality, here's what you might want to check into and set right expectations. And I was like, you know what? I respect that. And as I got to go and working with him on a couple more houses, he knew what to look for specifically. And it also taught me when I went to go pre-check a house, for example, like this one we just looked at, go in and say, hey, I'm going to take a look around. I want to check this. And I didn't have to be like open about it, but the realtor that was there knew. And I looked through it all, and she happened to know what she needed to know about the house to back up some of the things that I saw, and they didn't have to tell me, right? So I think the other piece to it is your advocate, in this case, it would be you, right? And as well as Chris,
Right.
should be taking a step to empower your client to be self-sufficient enough to be confident that when they see something, ask about it, and also be able to say, you know what, this looks obscene, and you can correct them, but respect the process as well. And I think that you both did that well.
Well, I appreciate that, and first time home buyer in Texas, and I'm really glad that you and I connected. I really am. It was I'm really really happy because the next chapter of you and Emily's life is here for a while. I hope, and I hope that the process, like you said, you're self-sufficient. It's an education process, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should not have an advocate by your side. Because you've got a job to do, and my job every single day is to buy and sell real estate. But it's not just that; it's guiding you through the emotional up and downs, the roller coasters, but also knowing that when we have these pivot points, like an inspection, and then the appraisal, and then the next step, right, go through underwriting. The inspections don't really kill the deal, and you hit on a good word there. Bad expectations and emotional decisions do, and I think if you're thinking about buying, just understand that from a consumer standpoint, you're going to have some emotions that go through, but don't let the emotions make the decision. Have that advocate for you and build that trust with your inspector and your real estate agent, just like James is saying.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing I've really appreciated with this process too is, you don't have to be an expert on everything. I've gone through some things in my life where I can appreciate a little bit about the electrical and plumbing and stuff, but I don't know it all. That being said, there are some houses down here that I'm sure are fantastic and look very rough, but, that may just not be the home for us. I think you and I, Jeremy, we looked at a house before we looked at this most recent one, and it hit all the right marks, right? It was in a great neighborhood. It had well-maintained foundation, electricals, all the core stuff was up there, right? But you know what the delimiter was on it that came down to it was at that point, were we going to be happy inside the home with the way that the layout and some of the modernization interior wise? We were able to have a bit of a nuance. And I think that was a good thing for us, because at that point, when you asked earlier in the conversation, was there ever a time where we just thought we'd take a break? And I think that was it. If we didn't find the one that we had now, that would have been the point where we were just like, you know what, maybe we need to step back. And thankfully it wasn't, but it's okay to take a break if it were to come to it. We weren't like going to regret the process.
Right. And, I'll leave you on this. I appreciate you coming on quickly. I know I called you kind of last minute. Chris was going to be here and talk more in detail about the inspections, but man, it's been great having you. I really want to thank you for the last few months. I think, that's about as long as we've got connected. And, I really, really am happy for you that you're able to get into the home that you guys are going to live in for the next years and years and years, and, enjoy your next chapter here in Texas, man. So I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me, man.
Yeah, and I appreciate the time. I hope that it's a benefit to somebody else that's out there, because like you said, every market's different. But that being said, having someone who knows the market really helps, but also having people that support you, for example, with your inspectors and your external teams like the other realtors, they need to make sure they're up on their game to back you up, because I don't ever want to have an experience where we go up against another realtor who wants to try to be the tough guy, right? That stuff's not going to work. And I don't think anyone would appreciate that, but you had our back on that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And I hope, down the road, you and I connect again when when you go to sell, or even if you felt like buying a second property, we can go through this process all over again and be emotional together again. So anytime.
Oh, I look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely, James. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on, man, and having this conversation with me. And we'll definitely be chatting soon, because we got to go back and do another walkthrough, and we got to close and to finalize.
Yeah, we do. Looking forward to the walkthrough this week.
All right, brother. Well, have yourself a good night, okay?
You too, Jeremy. Take care.
All right, take care.